And Professor Nawangwe is here to discuss that with us. And of course, the panel that is fully constituted here. So we are going to be starting with the fire, and we want to know what exactly happened, what went wrong, how could a university, you know, the biggest in Uganda, of course, you feel free to say the best as well, in Uganda, but the most resourced, with the biggest population, the oldest, how can it just go on fire when there is not even any good amount of, you know, firefighting to put away the fire, or at least save some part of it? The entire front is burnt, and we are going to be talking about that. Let's start with the professor. Professor, you're most welcome to the show. Not a very good topic to be discussing, but we have to discuss it all the same. They say the best managers are known in times of crisis. So you are here to discuss with us that crisis, but also to tell us way forward. What can we pick from this crisis? What have you exactly lost by now in that fire on Sunday?
Thank you very much, and good evening, viewers. As the moderator has said, this is a very heavy week for Makerere University. It is the saddest week we have had in the entire history of our university, because on the morning of Sunday, a fire razed our main building, which is an iconic building, not just for Makerere and Uganda, but the building which is known all over the world as the symbol of Makerere University and the symbol of higher education in Uganda and the entire East and Central Africa region. The investigations started in earnest to find out what caused the fire. And the first people who saw the fire saw that it was coming out of the roof. And the fire brigade was called. It came in a relatively short time, but they were not able to extinguish the fire before it had brought down the entire roof of the front of the administration building.
You said they came, they didn't delay. What time exactly do you think they came? Did they take about an hour after you learned that the information was sent to them? Because we need to know what exactly happened.
They were called at around 45 or 15 to 1 a.m. and by 1:10 they were already on site.
So about 25 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they tried to fight the fire, and I think when you say how come the biggest university the fire could burn like that, there was a problem that there was no fire hydrant nearby. We had enough firefighting equipment within the building, but the roof started
the small ones.
Yes, the roof started in, I mean the fire started in the roof, so those become useless when it is in the roof. And but they tried their best. Unfortunately, they were not able to save the roof of the building, and that means the entire top floor of the building was burnt together with all the documents that were there.
There was a lot of talk on social media, on the conventional media, about lack of fire hydrants, lack of fire, water hydrants. How come no fire hydrant exists in the university, within the university?
Well, I think sometimes it is because there is no memory between managers who come and those who leave. But eventually they discovered that there was a water hydrant near the estates, near on Bombo Road. But the fire brigade themselves didn't know that there was a fire hydrant there. And we would have expected, of course, that they have a map, okay? And they have a map which shows all the fire hydrants, so that when there's a fire, they know where to go. The problem, of course, then was that between Makerere and the headquarters of the fire brigade, there was no hydrant. So they had to rush all the time back to the headquarters to fetch water. But
so you are saying that even within town, between Makerere and the fire headquarters, there is no any other hydrant, water hydrant?
Well, that's what it means, because they told us they had to rush back to the headquarters all the time. A fire hydrant is a public system which should be managed by maybe the KCCA as the people who are responsible for the safety of the city, and the fire brigade. So one would expect that they know where they are, and where they are not, then they would alert people. Either they put them there or alert the building owners to install them. We were aware that the university did not have a water hydrant. The system at the university was built more than 70 years ago, and it is obsolete. So we had plans to overhaul the whole system, which the plans included installing the water hydrants, because that is a more modern system. When the system was built, there was no issue of water hydrants at that time.
Okay. Now, there is another thing we don't want you to run away from. I have been following, and I rushed to the university, both as a journalist but also as really a morning alumnus on that morning, and I remember meeting you. The first thing that came to my mind, and questions were coming through, again, social media, people were saying, what pieces shall we pick from this? And asking about insurance. Did you or did you not insure a building as precious, as prestigious, as historical as the main building, as the Ivory Tower? Did you or did you not?
It is true we had never insured our buildings, but
none at all.
None. Up
to now.
At the height of the fires at the institutions, the council took a decision that we must insure at least the major installations within the university, and that required valuation of the buildings by the government valuer. The government valuer had submitted a report of the valuation of the 3 buildings that we were looking at, and that was the main building, the library, and the Senate building. And the problem was, by the time we got the report, the budget process had already advanced. But we then started trying to get quotations, and unfortunately COVID came in and things slowed down, and we were caught in that kind of, but the plans for insurance were already in advanced stages.
Okay, so maybe the last question in this phase to you, Professor, so that I bring in. So as we talk right now, what do you think is the estimated cost of the damage done to that Ivory Tower? The good thing is that you are a senior do you by now know about how much is going to be spent to build a new infrastructure in that place? Will you use the old foundation? Is the foundation holding? Because I saw the amount of cracks, the damage and all that, all round cracks. I don't think you can use that wall. Correct me if I'm wrong as a layman. So what is the estimated cost of the damage going forward? And in how many months can that be rebuilt?
Well, apart from the investigations that are going on to establish the cause of the fire, we also have of the building. As you rightly say, most of the walls are cracked. And this is because the building was built using old technology. Of course, although we must get the full technical report, is that most of the walls will definitely have to be brought down, and then we have to rebuild. If necessary, we may have to remove the whole structure, But if it is possible to save some of the walls, especially on the lower levels where the fire didn't reach, I believe we will still have to introduce columns and beams and then build on top of that. It is not possible for me now to say how much it will cost, but we know from the valuation that was made by the government valuer that the building which has been destroyed was 15 billion shillings. Part of the building, of course, is not damaged. The main hall is not damaged because it was separated a little bit, and so it survived. But I believe that if we are to rebuild it, still it cannot cost less than what it is costing now, because now we have to use more modern technology. Even if we have to restore it as it is, we must use more modern technology. And therefore, probably 20 billion shillings might be required to restore it.
Okay, thanks. Let me first bring in Dr. Kedras at this point. You sit at the ministry, and this is the mother organization of especially public universities. Do you think that in terms of planning for things as basic as infrastructure like water systems, make sure that you ensure these kind of facilities, because they are iconic for the entire country, not only for that institution? Do you have that kind of arrangement, or because they are autonomous they have to run the way they want?
Thank you very much, and good evening, viewers. We don't have one because, as you've said, universities have a reasonable amount of autonomy. However, for bigger policy things, then that's where we come in, to guide, to make sure that the policies they come up with are not very far from what the mainstream ministry is doing. So I wouldn't say that we have a general policy yet on whether all universities should have all its buildings insured and so on. But as it's always said, with every heavy cloud there is always a silver lining. I think this which has happened to our university is a very, very sad thing, but an awakening, rude awakening for all of us, as COVID itself has been. So we are picking ourselves up on many areas, and I think moving forward we should have more systematic things looked at and applied.
But Doctor, someone would say, even as a government, as a country, we had one moment, I think late 2000 and coming towards 2010, when there were massive fire reports in schools especially. And someone would say, hey, wait a minute, guys, let's ensure as government, let's ensure that all facilities, especially those that that make a lot of historical sense, are either secured by putting close by, even markets got burnt. We know market, you remember, we know market. 2020, we still don't have anything done. Wouldn't it?
Well, I don't know whether they would be right to say we are doing nothing. I remember during that period you are talking about, because most of the burning was in schools, secondary schools, of course, Budo Junior, the primary school, and several others. We worked with the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and as a ministry we came up with guidelines against fires and against other disasters. And I think the schools, which are not tertiary and universities, have those guidelines. And when my team goes out for inspection, most of the time we also have to check as to whether those guidelines are being followed.
Okay. Honorable Matthias, if the government of Kedras, Dr. Kedras, slipped a bit, you would be in power. In other words, you are in opposition and you are looked at as the alternative government. Do you think that some of the issues that Professor Nawangwe and Dr. Tedros have said are things that, that sound good to your ears as an opposition leader. Is there something fundamentally wrong with our planning process? Or do you think that the fire at Makerere University is an accident per se that, you know, you cannot avoid as a human being?
Just for the record, do you want to put it right that the good doctor, lady doctor, is a civil servant, therefore not a servant of that would be fair of you.
She is a civil servant.
Sure. So
that's very good, Honorable.
If I didn't say that, yeah, I must make sure I clarify that.
Yes. For the record, in the circumstances, what are we opposed to as the opposition? There's nothing we are opposed to that is of a political nature. It's a contrast of policy and priorities. Just the history of fires in Uganda is well documented. You try to give an indication of how they have evolved over time from the market fires, Owino, and the rest. Of course, those, as we recollect, engendered by greed, by particular sections of business people to control others. Then, of course, the small shops, the old type design, Indian design shops in Kampala, where the greedy owners wanted to build arcades, but the tenants were not bargaining. So we were informed that the owners, the landlords, put the shops on fire, and in doing so, endangering lives and ending livelihoods. Suddenly, the school fires, the worst of them being the Budo fire.
The Budo one, which killed over 11?
Yeah, thereabouts.
Young people.
Because there are other fires where we lost children. For the public properties, we cannot forget the Kasuli Inferno. That again brought down one of the iconic, culture sites in Africa. So the question of the day is that our institutions are prepared to really protect and preserve what we value over time, or have they been over time learning from the mistakes of others? I was taken aback, one, learning that for all this time Makerere does not have a standby fire unit, that the entire estates department, as we know it, is really a yard of scrap. If you go to the estates department, the more iconic features there are all the buses of the Odongtho era and
of his dad.
Yes. You remember the tractors of Northcote, days that would use the Northcote estate days. They actually built the entire backyard of the university estate. I am shocked that there is hardly a firefighting gadget there that could really intervene in the interim as we wait for a big equipment. The other shock is that there was no trace of a nearby water hydrant. I am sure in the same university, perhaps maybe because the university is not operational because of the lockdown, if the university were open, you would easily find more police trucks of tear gas, perhaps near every faculty. So the question of the day, Charles, where are our priorities as a people and as a country? Of course, I'm not out to blame anyone. We can't have a university that lacks a memory lane, that administrators change and they can't track the kind of planning. Planning should really be moved from one generation to another, and if a particular council planned, management planned, then would add on that planning and retrieve it and see. You cannot have a new era coming and then saying what the of the council at Makerere. Over time, I have been able to read through their documents. They come to Parliament, the Education Committee, and there have been really a strong Makerere, they will tell you of what they're known for over the last couple of years. Is actually denuding the university of property, very key property, not even remember and preserve what there is. So we have a very big challenge. That the planning component of the university, which planning goes with budgeting, need to be really looked at very critically in face of this dark cloud. For instance, the choice to say, like he said, that they are thinking about ensuring 3 major university properties, the main building, Senate, and the this is the huge university, and they empower you by generating resources to protect their key resources. Each of these colleges has a library, they have laboratories, some of them that are science-based, they have archives. Part of the revenues generated should be on preservation of these key assets. Some of the lost properties are irreplaceable. Even with a bullion van of millions of dollars, you can hardly make a trace or procure some of the key valuable assets. So a lot of care needs to be put into planning and prioritization of resources, because a university is about these academic resources that you cannot easily procure even with a lot of money. So I would like to see a situation where we direct the key organs of the university, put a lot of energy on proper planning and avoiding this happening again.
Okay. Good. Mr. Gobi, where are our priorities as a country? Budgeting, planning, where do we put our hands, given what has happened in Makerere and with the history that we have had similar incidents like Honorable Mpuga has cited?
Thank you, Charles. I think, first of all, I would like to say that Professor Nawangwe, as a Vice Chancellor in charge, when this building was
please don't say in charge of the fire.
No, in charge of the university.
Okay.
I would definitely send my own regards and sympathies to him and the management at large. Makerere is in our hearts. I remember that site when I saw it, when I woke up on Sunday morning, and I saw the fire coming out of that building, and I don't know whether I will ever forget that image, because that building is actually what makes Makerere what it is, Makerere. We know it by that main building, and we are just, I think, a year or two away from celebrating 100 years.
2 years. Of
the university, and it's one of those memories which will never go away, that our iconic building went down. Before I go into your question on our priorities, I wanted to really say that accidents happen, but sometimes what we call accidents in Uganda are not necessarily accidents. I usually tell my students that when you are you are listening to radio or watching TV, and you hear journalists like Charles announcing accidents, so often I say those are not accidents, those are mistakes. When you drive recklessly on the road, or you are walking on the wrong side of the road, and then you get knocked, sometimes you may not call that an accident, because an accident has to completely be unavoidable, inevitable. So I don't know if you hear now that I know there are a number of historic buildings around the world which have been ravaged by fire. You remember last year that image we saw on international TV when I think a cathedral in Paris.
The one in France.
Yes.
I'm forgetting the name.
Yes.
Notre Dame. Yeah.
It's
800 years.
850 years.
Yeah.
You remember also a year before that, the National Museum of Brazil also was on CNN. Under fire, 200-year-old building. We have seen a number, and you understand that these old buildings are very susceptible to such accidents. They can, happen because of the fact that even if you are so watchful, they will happen. But how do you respond is very, very important. For example, the issue of insurance. Makerere is the one which teaches every Ugandan how the importance of insurance and the
importance of planning as well.
And our buildings are not insured. I hope the ones which are remaining are going to get insurance tomorrow. We shouldn't wait for another year of this challenge. I know even some of those halls of residence, they are quite very historic for Makerere, because very many of them are very old, built in 1950s, University Hall and so on. Please, Vice Chancellor, let us at least insure these ones and ensure that, and also we will put in place response mechanisms, because fire is real. Another time it could be earthquake, and so on and so forth. We need to mitigate all these kinds of risk. But now, when I listened to the regulator at the ministry, the ministry wrote guidelines for schools when they got banned, but they didn't write guidelines for institutions of higher learning. Perhaps maybe now that they are also having a problem, it has started at the Harvard of Africa. Makerere is known in other worlds as the Harvard of Africa. Maybe now we shall have more than guidelines in ensuring that we keep these historic sites safe. In the UK, actually, I learned that they have a full government agency responsible. It's called the Historic England, something like that. It has a CEO and all other people, managers, and its sole job is to protect historical sites and buildings in London and other cities of UK. These are kinds of things we need to really get serious with, because in this country we are losing a lot of history. Because we do not attach a lot of our a lot of importance to history. But history, legacy, heritage is very, very important, because I know we are going to reinstitute that building. It might come back to life after a few years, but I doubt we shall get that main building as it was.
I was telling the professor just before we came here that yes, you can even rebuild it. It might even look nicer, but that history that it was the one that was built, is it 1939?
No.
Has gone.
No, it might not go completely if they manage to maintain the architectural plans and so on.
The face will, if the face has been brushed and now it is plastic surgery, someone will say the face is plastic surgery.
Windsor Castle was burnt in 1992. Yes, but they rebuilt it and sealed the Windsor Castle, and it has its history as it was. A number of other buildings have been reinstated to their magnificent, structures and so on. So I hope and I really pray that we get the ability to restore that building. The alumni, as alumni, we are very, very ready to contribute if need be, so that our main building can get back to its state.
Okay. Honorable Katuntu, tell us, starting, if you like, with your the first experience you had when on social media you saw this breaking news in the morning of Sunday, what you felt, and as a senior legislator, what are your thoughts about some of these narrations that you're hearing about the going-ins at Makerere University, no water, this, no planning, this is supposed to be done, not yet done, no insurance? Your thoughts?
First of all, it was a sad day in the history of our biggest university in this country. As you know, many of us are alumni of this institution. That ivory tower, as we call it, is our pride. It reminds me of the national anthem, the great Makerere. You know, I can go on and on. We build for the future and so on. But it was also a rude reminder about the history of fires in this country. My brother Matthias talks about this history being documented, and I disagree. We've had so many fires. Has my brother Matthias ever read any report, a police report, about these fires? To establish the cause, whether they are the market fires or those that have burned down schools. I am a parent. I'll always remember that hero of ours, that young girl at Budo Junior, who was out of danger, but she tried to save her friends, and instead she perished. Do you, and now the regulator is here, do you have a report? Does the minister have a report about that fire? All the schools, do we have police reports? And if we've not had the reports, full policy investigation, so that the public is aware of the causes of the fire, and the managers of these institutions know that these are the challenges these institutions have, this is the vulnerability, and therefore they must take steps. Because you see, it's quite unfortunate that in many instances, we learn history to pass exams. We don't pick lessons out of it. We have fire after fire, like this one which has come. And after a week, 2 weeks, it will be history. Nobody will be talking about it. When you talk about the Paris fire of Notre Dame Cathedral, we now know the cause, because police has established it was just a reckless either cigarette smoking or electricity, whatever it is. It is established. What is the source of these fires? And the police should come out with public, documents, and we discuss them, such that managers like my brother, Professor Nawangwe, who manage institutions like this, know what to do. That is our biggest problem as an institution. Then it takes me to a second point about our fiscal planning. For heaven's sake, let me give you an example. We have fuel depots in this country, at industrial area here. Do you know that you have a school, Green Hill Academy, just built in the middle of fuel stores, or you call them fuel what? Depots. Just imagine if there is an accident. Who was at KCC at that time to sanction building a school within the middle of fuel depots? Let's be serious, guys. There's something fundamental wrong in this country. How do you, education, the regulator is here, you allow a primary school to be built next to a fuel depot, assuming there is an accident. And tomorrow we come here and start lamenting? There is something fundamentally wrong. Let us look at our preparedness. Professor Nawangwe is telling us today that fire brigade wasn't even aware. We have a joke in the 7th Parliament, we used to talk about, did you aware? Fire brigade did not aware, to use our job, that there was a hydrant near the SS department. Now, if fire brigade is not aware, who else do you expect to be aware? Because they are the main consumer of that hydrant. But they were not aware. So they have now to drive to the fire station. Let us look at the fire engines. You see those Mercedes trucks? And Marcius makes a joke, which is a correct joke, that is the Katuntu era fire engines. It is true. Those Mercedes-Benz were bought by the Obote II regime. The Obote II regime, those Mercedes-Benzes.
That's when we were at Makerere.
No, don't mind about that. but I can tell you that is where we have challenges as a country. How do we plan? For example, my brother Professor Nawanje, whom I have high respect, by the way, even when my own son was going to do a course abroad, I had to consult him. I had to send my son to talk to him because he's also trying to do the same course which Professor Nawanga advised architect. Let me tell you, we are talking about 3 buildings to insure. How can you say that institution can only insure 3 buildings? The whole of our history is that institution. You are not insured. When I was privileged to be the chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Commission, Statute Authorities and State Enterprises, I had a problem with Uganda Railways. There is one of our water vessels which collapsed. But it wasn't insured. But it was carrying cargo worth I think $500,000 or $1 million. And Uganda Railways was now supposed to be paying the passengers who had hired it and put on their cargo. This, I imagine, they are common sense. They are basics. And I expect Makerere to really, the ivory tower, to use the very word, to be aware that insurance, I mean, you teach everybody insurance. And if you can't insure your buildings, your equipment, then how do you expect this person in Chikubo to insure? Really, Professor Nawan, this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. Lastly, you see, take for example, traffic infrastructure in this country. Even if you had a fire during day, just imagine, do you have an emergency lane in this town where those fire engines can move in a short time so that they are at the scene where the fire is? What is the problem in this country? Why is everybody sleeping on his job? Is it that we are having the wrong people in those positions? I think we just need a fundamental change, to use President Yoweri Museveni's words, a real fundamental change. Because we are lucky we didn't have people around. But even then, I had the secretary. He tried to explain that they have kept all the documents and it's possible, you know, archives and so on, and digitized. You wait when Public Accounts Committee tries to investigate a few things, Auditor General, they'll tell you those who has got banned in that infamy. Lastly, was this an accident? Was this arson? The public demands the answer. So, my brother Professor Nawanga, whom I have high respect, you have a lot of work to do. A lot, because we expect so much. Makerere should be one of the best examples to the entire country. If we go through this, there is no insurance, there is a hydrant there, but nobody knows that it is there. It is until after. First of all, that hydrant should have been constructed maybe in the 40s or 50s. It is not a recent one. That's why nobody knows about it. So people, officers, people who planned for this city, as long as they knew that you needed a hydrant there. People who are managing this city in this age don't know that it exists. Sad day, sad story.
Professor, those are big questions, and from what your colleagues have said here, those questions need to be answered. Starting with, do we have, at your level of a professor, you can give us that answer, or what you actually think is the problem. Do we have the wrong people on the jobs? And then you can, and then in the case of Makerere, was this an accident? Because it can be an accident. I stood there for 4 hours, and from when the fire was now spreading from the left side, now consuming up to the right side, and then the entire roof came down, I was there. And what they're talking about, like a passage for the fire trucks, they didn't even at first have a passage. So in terms of planning, we really have a problem, like we are saying. But was this an accident or not? Start from answering some of those for our viewers.
Thank you very much, moderator. Let me begin by responding to the comment by Honorable Mpuga that our council is there just to sell property. For the record, the council has never sold any property. Instead, they have bought more property for the university. They have never sold any property. And they do plan. They do plan, but the demands are very many. You may not wish to know that, for example...
As it should be in management, Professor.
Yes.
Yes, life is about fighting for... there is always limitation of resources. Yes. So it is priorities that will make your planning look better than another one, isn't it?
Yes. I wanted to say that you have been to Makerere, all of you. You have been coming back
proudly.
And seen the enormous transformations taking place. You can say, yes, there were all those huge transformations, but maybe more attention could have been put on some of those issues that you are talking about. But definitely, we do plan. The resources are limited, but within the limited resources, I believe that we have done a good job. Now, whether we have the wrong people in the right places, I don't think so, because all these people are professionally trained people. I have looked at for example, the plans of expansion of Kampala, and everything is there as you would expect by any planner. The problem they will say is the resources to implement those plans. Of course, you can say we can do within what we have and do in a phased manner, but I think we have the right people in the places because they are all professionally trained people. We need to look where the problem is, and maybe it is because of our meager resources as a country. The insurance, how come we teach insurance and we haven't insured? We also teach bankers, but we have no money.
They are not related. They are not.
Yes, I mean, everything comes to the limited resources we have. As I told you, we knew that there was a problem, and the council took a decision: we must insure.
But Professor, I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I mean no harm.
Yes.
When you say that, and you continue hyping that there is no money, there is no money, yes. I am aware that when you had that meeting with the council said we need to insure as a matter of urgency. And that is why I think that you are driving the point rightly but I think it speaks to something. That yes, people have said that this country has no problem with the planning, that the problem is execution. And I can see it here, that actually council said and notified you and said we need to ensure these facilities and assets very fast. But I'm told you instead, your team decided to say our priority for insurance should be for the staff first. Isn't that what happened?
No, yes, you are talking about the issue of limited resources and the priorities. The two issues came at the same time, and the decision to do one was actually the council, because there was also pressure on the insurance of the staff. The university was spending colossal amounts of money on medical care for staff, and therefore a decision was taken, let's do medical insurance and plan for insurance of the buildings the following year. And every requesting for money to do the actual insurance. So the planning is there. You may say it has not been done in a long time, but eventually the council they realized that there was this problem and took those decisions. I must say that we don't know the cause of the fire, because there are people investigating. The experts are there. They have been there since the Sunday night. There were forensic experts who came. They already interviewed me, and the CID is there. They are stationed at the university all the time. We hope that they will be able to tell us the actual cause of the fire. So I can't speculate now on what the cause of the fire is. There is a committee.
But were there some staff who were working? Because did I hear the president right? I think the president didn't work. That could have been cited and leading to the arrest of 2 or 3 people. Were there some staff who were working on that building amidst this COVID?
No, there were guards who were guarding the building.
Okay.
But they didn't even realize that the building was on fire. That was the problem. I think they dozed, okay, until the people from outside came to wake them up. Yes, I think that is the negligence the president was talking about.
Okay.
But I was saying that the council has put up a committee to look into all those issues: the cause of the fire, the extent of the damage, the plans for reconstruction. So there is a committee working on all that. And I'm very happy that a lot of our alumni are actually saying they want to come and help. And thank you very much, Mr. Govi. I hope
we all will. We are eager to help you.
So we will be informing the stakeholders very soon how they can contribute to the reconstruction.
Okay. We definitely are itching to ensure that ivory tower is put back. Doctor, Honorable Abdul Katuntu mentioned something, and also your colleagues. There's issues you can respond to raised by the 3 colleagues. A fundamental problem with our planning system. In the ministry, in the mother ministry, is it what's the big challenge? Is it the making of the policy execution on the part of the users that creates this kind of mismatch?
Well, I think planning is at 2 levels. There is the big planning which Honorable Katuntu and his team have to approve at Parliament so that they give us money. And that one is usually led by the Minister of Finance. They give guidance on the kind of planning we should do. Today it's output, tomorrow it's outcome, now we are going into programs. So that base planning is there. However, as we are all aware, one of the big things that sectors have to do is policy development. And a number of policies have been developed. However, we don't yet have a policy per se on safety and security of schools and properties. As I said before, when we had those fires, we developed guidelines, but they are not based on a policy. Of late, we have picked ourselves up on policy development. For a long time, we didn't have a unit, the policy unit in the ministry. I think what Honorable Katuntu mentioned has some bit of truth. I think those who are employed there as policy analysts and whatever really were not helping us. But in the last now 3 years, we seem to have a team that knows what to do, and we have developed a number of policies, a policy on TVET, a policy on teacher, a policy on, we have about 4 policies lined up which are being worked on. So I think progressively we shall be able to pick all these key areas that we need to have policies on. So it's a progressive activity, but we are definitely moving towards there.
Okay. I have just seen, they have just alerted me that Honorable Margaret Muhanga is actually online. Finally, we have found her out. I just want, Honorable, just a minute, I want to bring in Honorable Mpuga, because Dr. Kedras has talked about some of the needs for policies. Honorable Mpuga, you are active in Parliament in the education sector. From what you are picking, are some of these things that ring a bell that must be activated, to be put up, to be established, to be even fast-tracked, given the threat levels? Because you are, the good thing, you are also a lawyer, and you know, laws have to come in to help society where there is a gap in some issue.
You know, Chairs, the allusion to resources as being inadequate is the perfect excuse where work has not been done. And but the good teacher here will tell you the difference between planning without plans and planning without plans. When you have a situation of planning without plans, you have paper tigers, and therefore you have a good plan and is only lacking resources for implementation. When you have planning without planning, it's what is happening is that even the simplest of plans have not been adopted. And therefore, as we look for fire brigade vehicles, we also have fire brigading plans. You can't have an output where even fire brigading plans. You're going to have a very huge challenge. And I will insist that some of the key players are sleeping on job. Prof, you'll excuse me for insisting, because I have a fair understanding of what goes on some of these sectors, especially education. I know for a fact, of course you can't be here on a national broadcaster and indict your council, your principals, so I am asking of you a lot to indict them. But you see, why you have a council fighting to procure toilet paper, pens, beans for the university, they will hardly find time to plan comprehensively. They only plan for that budget where somebody wants to supply beans. And therefore, that's why they are inclined. Because none of them want to supply a firefighting equipment or to install water hydrants. The planning won't be that expansive. So there is a big problem. There is a big void in planning comprehensively to bring the entire sector into the mirror, into light, and see the fissures and fix them in earnest. So we can only be honest to ourselves and think comprehensively on how best we can bridge these gaps in all the sectors. For example, we have had a challenge of implementing programs in the ministry, programs not premised on a well thought out policy. She's made a confession that there are actually no policies on some of the plans, and that's a problem. So when you look at the future of a particular program, the future is bleak because it's not premised on a well thought out policy. Bearing in mind the prospects for the resources and possible challenges at implementation, given the fast-moving, nature of our economy. One of the things I thought about when someone was saying, you see, there was a water hydrant at the estates, and the police didn't know where it was. It's because, again, the planning of the police remains old age. Because the hydrant will be somewhere on the screen. The police, by simply ticking on a button would locate every water hydrant. You know, they don't have to be moving with a hoe and a spade to excavate, to look for a hydrant. You know,
it's supposed to be automatic.
Certainly.
You just press fire, and it's supposed to come.
Locate. You know, they are very, very eager to know where Abdu is, but not where they can locate, you know, a water hydrant. So it goes down to, again, to what you mentioned, what our priorities as a country. So when you get priorities wrong, you actually end up fixing yourself when you find yourself in a problem.
Okay.
So it's back to the priorities of the country.
Before you go to the next, because I raised 2 points which I thought the public would benefit from the regulator. One, do you have police reports on the school fires? Have you read them? That's number one. As a regulator. Number two, what do you think of a school of hundreds of pupils being built within the vicinity of
petrol station?
No, not petrol station. Depot.
Fuel depot.
Fuel depot.
Even more
is it okay for you as a regulator to have hundreds of pupils, younger pupils, built within the vicinity of a fuel depot? Proud of it.
Dr. Kedras, you want to respond to that?
The doctor will respond, but you know, Abdu hitherto was saying, I made mention of the history of fires, and asked me whether I have ever read any police report. Actually, part of the history is that there is no police report. So the facts on the fires don't reside with the police. So, but the public knows that the record is there is no police report. The doctor can answer this.
Doctor, do you want to answer some of those questions? Those two
I mean, actually, our concern, and they are public concerns. Not that we are putting you in the corner, but we think these are legitimate concerns, where you as a regulator should be so much concerned about.
I'll make an attempt. When these fires happen, we have the police investigation, but we also have our professional ministry investigation. So we have reports of the ministry investigation. And for a long time, we are waiting for the Budo police investigation report to be able to reconcile what we found out and what they did. I'm not sure that we got it. I would not say that I have read it from the police. Concerning a school being built next to a depot, it's not acceptable. But I know that it has happened. There's a school that you referred to. I know where it is. And there are several other schools which we even asked to close, and some closed, and after a short time they opened. Recently, since 2 years ago, we discovered there are so many illegal schools because they are not licensed, they are not registered. We tried to work with local governments and closed some. By the time we went back to check, they had been brought back, you know, and the local governments were aware they were back. So we have that challenge as well. We can't be everywhere. Our system is decentralized. Part of the decentralized system are not doing what they should do. So we have a number of things that are not right, but which we have been struggling with without a lot of success.
Okay, thanks, Doctor. Let me quickly bring on board Honorable Margaret. I've seen you. Are you still with us? Right there.
Yes.
Good. Noting that Fort Portal City must always be good, you have followed bits and pieces of this discussion on the unfortunate fire at Makerere University. What do you make of this, especially the discussions that have risen, whether there is planning or not, what are our priorities as a country, but also as some of these institutions, and Makerere not ensuring its vital, you know, national vital assets. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Charles, and good evening, viewers. I wouldn't want to put Professor Barnabas Nawangwe in a hot spot, because an accident is really an accident. Whatever caused that fire is unknown up to now. But it really is heartbreaking to see such an iconic building go up in flames. But you never know what could have happened until the police report is out. We cannot tell what happened. But I envisage a situation where maybe just a careless smoker could have dumped his cigarette somewhere, and it started small and then it put the building up in flames. It could have been somebody who was making tea in a kettle and forgot to switch off, and maybe later in the night it blew up and the building came up in flames. So it could be arson, you never know, but I can imagine it may not be arson. Nonetheless, Professor Nawangwe, being a professor of architecture, I'm sure he will look at all the options left and put that building back to its shape. I'm sure also Ugandans are looking out to see that building in its old shape. Nobody wants it changed, either in color or shape. And what has actually given me a lot of hope, you know, for me, I'm a very optimistic person. It has given me a lot of hope that only the upper offices got burnt and just one side, meaning the lower part that holds the building is solid, meaning that this building can be put back in shape. What worries me are the documents that got burnt. And indeed, what the Honorable Abdu Katuntu, I think, or Matthias Ipuga said, that at one point they will be called to answer somewhere and come with documentation, and it could become a scapegoat that these documents got burnt in the main building. That will be another unfortunate incident if anybody wants to use it to hide documents or to protect themselves. But you see, why something is called an accident is because it happens when no one expects it. Imagine somebody builds up a car, manufactures it, puts all precautionary measures, brakes, fast brakes, hand brake, where you can stop and then avoid an accident. But not every person will avoid an accident. We know a lot of carnage on our roads. So in an accident, you cannot start to blame anybody. What we do is to look for a solution, not to zero on a problem. A lot of people, indeed, like you said, Makerere University teaches insurance, but then they have their buildings uninsured. Somebody brought in a very simplistic comparison and said, we also teach economics, but we don't have money. That's a very simplistic comparison, but I think we are learning from our mistakes. And I am sure that the professor now is thinking ahead, because this comes as a stain on his good name, that during his reign as Vice Chancellor, Makerere's main building was set ablaze or went up in flames. So he really has to work hard to leave a good name, to put back that building in shape. And you know, Ugandans are so full of, I won't call it malice, a forethought, but I can call it malice intentional. Because somebody will say, how come you are thinking about 20 or 15 billion? Have you already done the cost? Have you already estimated the cost? And people will start claiming that money was squandered at the time we were rebuilding Makerere University. All that will come into play. But we all hope that there isn't anything big that has been destroyed in this fire, that every important document was secured, because I saw people running out with some files, and I thought maybe something very important got out of that building. But I'm sure Makerere has also gone, because I see a lot of things now are online. I'm sure you have a backup somewhere of every document that you have as a hard copy. I'm sure you have it in soft copy and a backup somewhere else, such that we can retrieve all this information and we don't lose a lot into this inferno. Government has had a lot of history of schools burning, and I don't want this to be politicized like my colleagues would do. These fires in schools have really left Ugandans very worried. A lot of our children are burning in schools, property is lost, especially in private schools. Some people alluded to the fact that it is rivalry between schools. Some other good schools have also had fires, like the top schools in Kampala, where they have actually made it a secret, but without even reporting to the police, but they have paid up parents quietly and put out these fires. There is something I have learned over time, that in all cities, even here in Uganda, it is a prerequisite that every building of that caliber must have fire extinguishers. And the people who man these places as askaris are trained to run these simple extinguishers, fire extinguishers. And if this fire started small and grew bigger, somebody, if these night watchmen were curious, maybe they would have picked one or two of these fire extinguishers and helped put out the fire before it blew up. But all this has happened and we cannot undo it. We can't rewind the clock. You know, the clock runs very fast. It cannot be rewound. But what we are doing is finding a solution to problems ahead of us. And Professor Nawangwe, I beg that you put insurance in place, although insurance does not really stop the fires, and whatever is burnt, insurance cannot bring it back. But what insurance would save you is the cost of putting this building back into shape. And also saving government from colossal sums of money that will be put to repair this building. But allow me say one thing that has disappointed me so much about Makerere of recent. The buildings, especially the halls of residence, they are wearing away. They are looking so rotten. I went to Lumumba recently and I could not believe our students are living in such ugly rooms. The building cannot even have a small coat of paint to put it back to shape. It is so ashamed that our iconic university is going to the dogs. Even a simple coat of paint cannot be added onto a building to give it at least some semblance, some good face. It is so ashamed that you have left even your own residences for staff in very, very pathetic conditions. Sometimes I drop off my friends who live within the university and I cannot believe why even the person who has lived in a house for over 10 years cannot put a coat of paint on his own house to make it look good. I think we need to change our mindset as Ugandans. Even if the house belongs to an institution, you have lived in it for over 20 years or 10 or 5. Why wouldn't you take a responsibility even to clean around your house? Makerere is a shame these days. I drive a lot to the faculty of veterinary medicine. I have friends who live and work within the university. It gives a very bad impression to Ugandans that our oldest university is the dirtiest, the most disorganized. We collect a lot of money from school fees. There are so many students in the university who are on private sponsorship. Why wouldn't you really get some little money and give the university a face. Some years back, I saw the university administration put up a very nice impression at the entrance. But the moment you enter, is it left or right? You simply see very ugly buildings. And I don't think, at least collect the alumni. And we pay money for these buildings to be painted. Do a fundraising if you think the university cannot do it. But it is giving a very bad impression. Professor Nawangwe, please do something. Abdul Katuntu said he has a son who is doing architecture and is coming to consult you. I'll also bring my daughter who is doing architecture, who can come and also do consultancy. And really, we need to put that university back in shape. The dirt, the rotting away buildings, it really gives a very bad impression. Anybody entering that university lives with a broken heart.
Thank you, Honorable Margaret. I wanted to call for a break immediately after Honorable Margaret, but she has raised very serious issues that, Professor, you may need to respond before we go for a short break and then come back with our second topic. Let me give you the right of reply, just a minute, to some of those issues she has raised. The pathetic situation that Makerere is lately an embarrassing sight, and the examples she has given, you have heard her say them, and then she raises pertinent questions relating to suspected, corruption, saying that a lot of money is raised, and where does this money go? Why can't you, as managers of the I almost said of the administration, but of the university, as managers of the university, why can't you ensure that the university looks the part? Why can't it look the best? Like Honorable Katuntu, is it Honorable Katuntu or Ramadan who said, the Harvard of Africa? Why can't you make it look that? If others have not done before, why don't you do better than others and leave something that is more memorable, and you create a better legacy than all other vice chancellors that you succeeded?
Thank you very much. I think let me begin with the suspicion of corruption. There is a general feeling that there is a lot of money in Makerere, and people don't know what it is doing. The fact is that Makerere's infrastructure is huge, as you have said. The plant is huge, and it requires a lot of money to lift it. We have, of course, as I have said, more than doubled the teaching space over the last 20 years. So most of the money, when it was still there, was going into improving the teaching space. After some time, the university had to begin contributing to salaries, and that sort of put a stop to those improvements, because the money then went into salaries. The money is audited every year, and by the way, now we don't even get any money on our accounts, because the money is collected directly by URA, which then takes it to the consolidated fund, and then we are given money according to the budget, which is approved by the parliament, and the money is strictly spent on the items that the parliament has approved. There is no way you can spend it on anything else. So because the measures taken, really you cannot say that there is corruption. You can say maybe priorities. Honorable Katut is smiling, but that's the fact. We don't get any money on. We don't even have accounts now. By the way,
I have been chairperson of an accountability committee.
Yes.
Of Parliament.
Yes.
So I know how public money is swindled. It's not about the system we are talking about, but it's about procurement and the expenditure. That is the point when money is lost?
Yes, maybe, but but I appreciate the comments. We have a very modern plant that has come up, buildings looking very beautiful, and beside them, dilapidated buildings. And of course, then you look at them and say, oh, these are really dilapidated, because the comparison is so, yeah, it's so huge. It's so huge.
They removed here. They would lynch the professor.
One time I drove past and I couldn't believe that was the Lumumba. No, of course, me, I'm from the Great North Coast State.
Lumumba is one of the newest buildings.
So you just need to, even what we used to call a box. No. If you pass that lane and see what box is, Professor Nang, I don't know whether you sometimes pass there and you see what it is.
We go there and we are aware of the problems. We have a grand plan to renovate all these buildings by the time we celebrate our estimates, the drawings and the bills of quantities. We are now fundraising.
Maybe, Professor, what legacy do you want to leave at Makerere as a Vice Chancellor? When you, a year after you have left, and we are comparing you to other Vice Chancellors, what do you want me to remember you for?
I want to be remembered for having transformed a university to be a research-intensive university solving national problems. That is my focus.
I hope those national problems include lack of proper planning.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course, job creation for all the many youths that are coming up, the climate change, an intensive research university. But definitely an intensive research university with a modern 21st century infrastructure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Sounds good. Okay. Let's go for a break now. When we come back, this very good guest will look at, you know, the reopening of schools from 15th of October 2020 and whether it is safe. Dr. Kedras will be taking us and leading us through that discussion, but certainly these are the best guests to discuss that as well. Let's take that short break now.
When WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic, the Ministry of Health reacted.
Fellow parents, following the ease of the lockdown, many of us have returned to work, but our children are still at home, and the risks that are posed to these children are still glaring. The recent police crime report indicated that over 7,000 children, just between the months of January and June, were sexually abused. We are seeing skyrocketing numbers of children with teenage pregnancies across the country. I am calling upon you to remember that even now as we enter the political season, children are at risk of being used as bait by politicians, being kidnapped, and some being sacrificed for ritualistic purposes. I call upon you, fellow parents, to be vigilant, to ensure that you know where your children are. Let us continue to engage our children as much as possible. Let us keep them busy such that we do not stand the risk of losing an entire generation.
This message is brought to you by the AfriChild Center, Makerere University, in collaboration with the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development.
Welcome back from that short break, and this is Behind the Headlines, and we have guests from, we have Professor Nawangwe, Vice Chancellor of Makerere University. We have Dr. Kedras to the agenda from Ministry of Education. We have Honorable Puga Matthias, who is the Shadow Minister in charge of Education. He belongs to the National Unity Platform Party. We have the, and he's MP for Masaka Municipality with the people of
Masaka City.
Masaka City now. Oh, sorry about missing that part.
Don't smallerize me.
What has changed in Masaka?
I want to smallerize you. That's a nice one. Now I have bigged you.
Why are you beginnizing me?
Oh, I have cityfied you, for that matter. And here we have in the studio the two panelists, Mr. Ramadan Gobi and of Makerere University Business School, and Honorable Abdu Katuntu of Bugweri.
Idudi City.
Of Idudi City.
Is the woman chair? Woman
and joining us,
acting woman member of parliament for Bugweri district.
Joining us through Zoom is Honorable Margaret Muhanga. Also now, we have to also big her because she is for Fort Portal City. I hope so one of you did literature, because I'm told literature students are the only ones who are allowed to create English, and you can justify it. But let's go for that, the second topic. Honorable Margaret Muhanga is joining us through Zoom all the way from Fort Portal City. Dr. Kedras, you announced this week through the presidential address that you broke that news that schools, final year students are going to resume classes, and they number up to about 1.2 million across the country. I don't know whether that included the ones of Professor Nawangwe, the students of Makerere University, and other universities and tertiary institutions as well. But there are a number of lingering questions whether this return is driven by the plan to return to school, reopen, is driven by, you know, the reality on the ground as against COVID. The COVID, today I saw Ministry of Health announcing, I think yesterday's report, that we lost 5 people. Which would mean that is the highest, I think, in a day, death reported. And that would mean that the situation seems not to be getting any better. Numbers are increasing of reported infections, and schools then are being reopened. So tell us, Doctor, what informed the plan or the decision to ensure that you announce schools to reopen, whichever school?
Thank you, Charles, for that very important question, because across the country, almost every household is a stakeholder in education, because you either have children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews, so everyone is really concerned about what goes on in education. When the COVID pandemic started early March this year, on 20th of March, all our schools and institutions were closed. And this affected about 15 million Ugandans, starting from preschool up to university. And we set up a task force which was doing the preliminary work, but the whole entire sector eventually approved what we call the Preparedness and Response Plan. This plan has 3 core areas that we've been looking at. Area number 1 is continuity of learning while children are at home. And I hope the Ugandans remember that in May, we made an attempt to provide harmonized teaching through radios and TVs and self-study materials. We thought at that time that the closure would be short-lived, and we hoped we would be opening sooner than later, because up to that point we didn't have any death, and we seem to have been managing the COVID pandemic. However, and you remember around that time the President announced that actually the candidate classes would open. There was kind of evidence that we were safe. However, from the reports of the scientists and the Ministry of Health, which has been in the driving seat to work on this pandemic, looking at the risk analysis they had at that time across the country and the progression of the pandemic, we were advised it was not safe. So there were 3 areas. One is continuity of learning. Second is preparing schools for reopening. And the third one is working with schools and institutions to develop resilience for any other emergency in future. But we've been working mostly on the first 2, continuity of learning and preparedness for reopening. So under preparedness for reopening, we developed guidelines that's hoping that anytime any from around May would open. And when those guidelines were developed, then we were reminded that since this was a health issue, we needed to have the standard operating procedures as guided by Ministry of Health. So the sector worked with the Ministry of Health, and we came up with the SOPs, the standard operation procedures. When those ones were brought to us, to the ministry, after all that we did together with Ministry of Health, it was thought prudent that we don't just look at the SOPs, but we develop a strategy out of the SOPs. How will these SOPs be used to help schools open and run and keep schools, children and teachers safe? So we developed a strategy and eventually a roadmap on how schools can actually open. And in all this, we've been working with Ministry of Health. We've been consulting with them, consulting with the team of scientists who have been looking at the pandemic, doing analysis, coming up with trends. So we've worked with other stakeholders. We've made many consultations with all other groups that work with us normally, with UNATU, with our education development groups, with representatives of parents and foundation bodies. We've made consultations on all these guidelines and strategies we have developed. So when everything was done, then we went back through the system that has been looking at the provisions for each sector that has been seeking reopening. First of all, I think in principle, the reopening is phased across the board, and all these other sectors which have opened have done it in a phased manner, partly because of the social distancing that is required as a basic for prevention. And when we looked at the numbers of learners in our schools, which are driven by our very high population growth, we discovered we cannot open the schools again at full scale. If we did, we would never ever meet the basic requirements under the SOPs, especially the social distancing. So we accepted the principle that it has to be phased, and because the candidates and the finalists at institutions are at a transition point, they are moving either from primary to secondary level, or from lower secondary to higher level, or from A levels to tertiary and so on. That was a very critical part of our education system. And so our plea was, if we are to do phasing, could we look at those transition years, transition groups? And eventually it was accepted, and that is how we come up to this point of looking at 15th of October as the opening for those institutions. However, before then, when the SOPs were finally agreed on and Cabinet approved them, we at the Directorate of Education Standards, because one of our basic standards is to look at safety and security of learners and institutions, as we've been sharing this evening. We went out and met all the district leadership, the district task forces, the district education team, and the key people at the district, and we disseminated what is in the SOPs. And we said, if schools are ever to open, these are what schools should fulfill. And that's more than a month ago. And we agreed with the district leadership that they too were going to disseminate that information to the schools and the school leadership. The reports I've been getting at my office is that all the districts have made an effort to disseminate those SOPs to the schools. So at least the schools for more than 1 month, they know what is expected if their schools are to open. So we now have this opportunity to open, and there will be more that will be done. I'm sure that maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, these detailed guidelines will be available to the public. Because by yesterday, the top leadership, the political group, was finally looking at them, and once that is done, they will be available. And they spell out details of what is expected. Two, we are going to have teams of inspections to every school that will open. And we have designed a certificate of compliance, so the institutions that would have met the basic requirements under the SOPs will be allowed to open. So we are not just saying open, and whether you have what it takes or not, you open and then you find yourself in trouble. No, we are taking every precaution to see that once the schools have opened, the schools which open are ready to open and run and keep the schools, the learners and the staff safe.
A follow-up question to that, and I want to bring in Professor Nawangwe first, together with the Honorable Mpuga, because they are the ones who handle, and also Ramadan Gobi probably will tell us what moves will be planning to reopen. The question of, you announced that you are going to support the government funded schools or the public schools. How in your planning are you going to handle the many, actually I think, if I'm not wrong, majority of the students in Uganda are actually in private schools, right? I need to be informed on that, or to be clarified on that. But how are you going to handle private schools that, despite the fact that they provide education as a priority, they have to run profitably? How are you going to handle that mismatch? The public schools, because salary of teachers, provision of materials, social services within the school are provided by government, but these private schools have to pay for everything. How do you plan to handle them? And their numbers, their big numbers, or even the students that study there?
First of all, since we got the SOPs and shared them out, because we shared with everybody, private schools themselves have been making effort to see how they can get themselves ready to open. In fact, they have a body that has been coming through. I think you may have read in the papers recently how they've been drumming each other up to see that they get what it takes to open. That does not remove the fact that all of us, I think, globally and especially in Uganda, have been hit economically through this COVID-19. So the struggle for funds by private schools is real, and they've actually brought forth their challenges. These challenges have been discussed at various levels, and I think, as the President mentioned, there is still some more discussion between private schools and Ministry of Finance. However, Charles, I would like to say that I hope Honorable Katuntu was in that parliament. When we revised our act to the present act of 2008, there's a very big section on how to start a private school, what it takes to run it effectively, and so on. But when you read it deeply, the spirit of that provision actually is that you are, which is very close to, I think, what is generally under the privatization policy. The spirit of that law is that you offer a service, a social service called education, in being a proprietor of a private school. Because one of the requirements in the law is that you should have sufficient funds to run a private school. So although private schools do get a bit of profit eventually, but it shouldn't be the real motivation for their starting of private schools.
As an ideal and as a principle, I agree. But, Doctor, you know that COVID has presented a new normal, as we call it, for all across board. And so maybe let me bring in Honorable Mpuga at this. Let me not say it myself, because I wanted to go into the issue of saying that why not a dead year? Why are you rushing them back into school where you're going to create, imbalances? Some people are going to have to go back because they can afford. Some schools can afford, especially in urban and cities, urban areas, whereas schools in the villages, in rural areas, will not will not afford perhaps to buy even maybe just 10 buses to implement the SOPs. Let me invite Honorable Mpuga first, and then Professor Nawangwe after, to weigh in. Do you think, in your estimation, that this plan to reopen should be is safe enough for our children?
Charles,
and how better could it be done? Since government has taken the decision, you should also have that in mind.
Yeah, the whole idea of opening schools is convoluted, so to say, and it is really controversial. First of all, I doubt that a proper dialogue has been held and a relative conversation has been had between the stakeholders. Today, we had a debate on the floor of Parliament, and the Minister of State for Education, my good friend and mentor, Dr. Muyingo, was literally chased by members of Parliament from the Educational Committee for not involving them in what he was presenting, because they did invite him for a discussion, having heard from the President that they would open schools. They called him to do a dialogue with him, and when he came on the floor, he had a different view from the conversation he had with members of Parliament, and that was very chaotic. So, to respond directly to your question, the Minister in his statement today did make mention of the very issues the doctors raised here, including appraising us on the continuity of learning framework, which is not a plan, but really a half-hearted arrangement, makeshift arrangement in the face of COVID that will keep our learners alive and still willing to learn. But the phased approach to reopening of schools in the interim is acceptable as we observe what happens going forward, especially for children that are candidates and finalists in the various institutions of higher learning, because for them a lot more is at stake. Not that there is anybody who would take benefit of losing a year, but because the stakes are actually differ from stage to stage. One of the key questions that really arose, because the Minister did say that learning for the rest of the classes will continue, and therefore they don't envisage a dead year. That for me was the killer, because the entire arrangement of continuity of learning framework for me is what I call organized chaos. It has three issues. You know what they call organized chaos? Three issues. One, that they will continue with the radio and TV learning. My foot. Members of Parliament report that in their constituencies there are no radios. In fact, they listen to radios from Kenya and other jurisdictions. And therefore, any learning being aired from Uganda or from UBC or any other TV does not reach them. But actually, to reach some of their constituencies, you first go to Kenya and then come back to Uganda.
That must be areas like Bukwo.
Certainly.
The Sebei area.
So the framework that involves radios and the television does not include their children. Two, that online materials will continue to be provided. My foot, where are they? But this is part of the continuity that will engender a promotion to another class. Therefore, there's no dead year being envisaged going forward. Thirdly, that they will continue distributing learning materials. The last time Parliament got a report on learning materials was that a single document would be sent to a sub-county where there's no power and where there was no prospect of having distributed to the learners. In a single school, government, or to an RDC, perhaps found him in a bar drinking and say here is a math paper for distributing to all schools. This is typical organized chaos. And I did ask the minister that you have a report. Do you have a kind of report on how the entire arrangement performed? There's no report. He's saying this is continuing anyway.
Okay.
So where are we? So the whole thing is that we could do better. We could do better, and we're rethinking the prospects. I don't think that the whole idea of deciphering how private schools work and government schools work has been properly thought through. Take an example. You're making provision to offer government schools all the requirements. You're telling private schools to buy temperature guns, to buy disinfectants, to buy whatever. And all this, as it were, requires a lot of resources. If you say you are opening schools in phases, there's a whole huge cost on private schools on how to sustain teachers that have not gotten a salary for the last 7 months.
True.
So how do you deal with that?
Good. Professor Nawangwe, you also have a number of students who are supposed to come back to finish as finalists. Do you think this arrangement is feasible at a practical level?
Yes, thank you. We have, of course, guidelines from the government which students can return, and basically the ones who will physically come back to campus to complete their second semester are the final year students. And so our plan is that the medical students, final year medical students, will report on 3rd October, and they should complete their studies by 28th November. Remember, we broke off the second semester when we were almost done.
Yeah.
So they are simply coming to complete. The rest of the final year students for the other programs will report on 17th October and complete their studies by 12th December. The numbers of students returning are only 1/3 of our students. So the issue of
1/3 means how many?
About 10,000.
About 10,000.
Yes.
You have about 30,000.
Yes.
Okay.
So they will be able to achieve the social distancing. We will provide the sanitizers and so on, and also the protection for the lecturers. And we expect the students just at least to have the masks. But otherwise, everything else we will get.
And you will run on the same resources that they had already paid, no additional?
No, except those who hadn't paid all the fees. Those have to pay the fees.
Oh, yeah, oh yes. Those who have not paid, please come back with them. That is standard. I agree. But I mean, those who had paid are not in full, are not coming back with any additional coin.
No.
Not needed.
No.
Good. Honorable Katuntu, do you think that schools in your P7, S4, S6 in Idudi city, in Idudi city, the city is not the level of Masaka. This is Honorable Katuntu's. That in your constituencies, those schools have that capacity. Do you envisage them returning and being safe in school?
First of all, we are living under very difficult times. And difficult times call for difficult decisions. We don't have to be populist or bow to pressure because we want to please a certain section of our community. Personally, and I think every reasonable parent should be prepared for a dead year for his kid, psychologically. Our students last went to class in March, and we are talking about September, October. How many months are in between and what has been lost? Do we still have something which they call a syllabus, where teachers do teach. I happen to have taught for quite a number of years, of course at postgraduate level. And if you know that this particular period, we have to cover these topics. Have the children, our students, covered that course or study which they intended within that time for them to do exams like Professor Nawang is talking about? Any candidate class, have they or they have not? Two, we still have a problem. Months back, Uganda was on top of the situation of COVID-19. The cases were very, very minimal. Today, what the scientists are telling us, that we cannot now even trace contacts. We are in phase something, phase X, where the situation is actually worse. And what does that mean, Professor Nawang and Doctor? It means that the standard operating procedures which have been advised by the ministry have not been followed. So the situation has degenerated over time. We actually don't know that actually there are even many more cases that they have not yet discovered. Our health facilities are sort of now coming to a situation where they are going to be overwhelmed.
No, they are overwhelmed now.
They are already overwhelmed.
I think I heard the minister saying that they are already overwhelmed.
Yes.
They are now positive cases being identified and being advised. We can treat you from home. You can be handled from home.
Exactly. That means the situation is actually getting worse. So this thing you are telling us, standard operating procedure, does not actually take place in our country today. Because, and let me tell you, go to our upcountry areas, communities. If there is a barrier, these scientific barriers are, I think they last happened in February. In March, people now, you have hundreds of them together. We've just gone through a political process. I don't want to talk politics today. Did you see any standard operating procedures? During this political process, one of the biggest political parties has just gone through. Now, how do you expect Professor Nawange now to monitor and enforce standard operating procedures at his university with his 10,000 students? So let me tell you, let us get serious, guys. Folks, we are in trouble. This disease is real. We don't have to romanticize about it. The situation is getting worse. We now have more cases, we have deaths, and now we are opening up our kids who have been literally at home. Now we are throwing them in schools.
Well, somebody said in Parliament that so we close the schools without no case. We are opening them with several cases.
And when the cases are on the rise. Well, where is the logic? Where is the common sense? I don't see it. I'm yet to be convinced that we are making a correct decision. I know, especially our colleagues in private schools, teachers, really they want to open up and have a little bit of income and so on. Even universities, because they also depend so much on private students and so on, and they need money to run their institutions, including now some little money to rehabilitate their infrastructure, which is burning down. But let me tell you, money is not everything. And that's why I agreed with President Museveni at the beginning, when he was saying he's doing this because money is for life. It's for life.
Economics can wait.
Can wait.
That's what he said.
But now, teachers want to earn money, yes. Professor Nawange has a problem. He must pay his lecturers and get some income to spend on his programs. And I'm not talking about Professor Nawange here, but I'm talking about
as an example.
As an example of all other institutions. And here we are now being...
and to advance the good of those whose interests you've committed to their charge.
Amen. Item 2, on the other paper, communication from the chair.
Honourable members, I welcome